Hey now, welcome to the City Off Campus podcast with your two favorite hosts, Sammy Sommerfeld and Jack McFarland. Today we're with NFL sports agent and vice president of Neostar Football, as well as the co-host of Breaking Into Sports podcast. We're with Sammy Spina today. Sammy, first off, I have to compliment you on your name. Great name. Double S. I'm a double S too with the initials.
Man.
So how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you both for having me. Honestly, it's a pleasure.
Yeah,
But
no.
we got to figure out who the real Sammy is by the end of this, right?
Oh,
I
and
think
we
Jack
will.
alluded to that off air.
We will. And
Yeah.
so before we jump into career questions, sports questions, I have to ask you, and if you haven't been to one of these places, then this is just gonna be a bad question on my part. But
Okay.
I want to ask you, as a Pittsburgh guy, are you a Permanis guy, or being in South Florida, are you more of like a 2J's type of guy?
You know what? That's a tough question. So I would say, I'm a Pittsburgh guy through and through. I'm still very blue collar in that aspect. I love my Permanis. I thought it was normal growing up that you have French fries and coleslaw and everything. We have it in our salads, our sandwiches. So I thought it was everywhere. And I moved to Miami and I'm like, man, everyone here is all healthy and like eating vegan meals. Like, where are the fries at? Where are the coleslaw at? But I got to say there is a place better than Permanis back in Pittsburgh called Foster House. And they do the same sandwiches. Yeah, but they have creamy coleslaw and then they have the thick waffle fries. So
yeah, can you explain, for our audience that hasn't been to Pittsburgh, or to Jack who might not know, can you explain what a Permani sandwich is and why they're so famous, or a Foster's sandwich, like the Pittsburgh sandwiches?
Oh, because it's the best thing you'll ever eat. It's the healthiest meal you can have. But no, honestly, it's like this homemade bread, and it's like thick cut bread. I don't know the name of it, but you get these two slices of it. You put whatever you want in the middle, right? So I always get this thing called the Pittsburgher, and it's essentially like a burger mixed with like a steak sandwich type of thing. And then on top of that, you have your tomato, which I don't get. I take mine off. But you put coleslaw and French fries. Then you smash it all together, and that's your giant sandwich. It ends up being about this thick as you're trying to smash it in to take that first bite. But it's incredible. I can't lie.
So I have to ask you, how do you go from Pittsburgh to South Florida? Can you kind of tell us about your early life, your early, education career, kind of starting from there before you became a sports agent, and what kind of brought you to South Florida from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, no, definitely. Honestly, I tell everyone this. It was God, 100%. And I'm a big believer in, Jesus has guided me through some crazy times in my life. So I had no plans of ever going to Florida, but my plans are irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. It's all about his vision, his guidance. And so I've learned to trust that. But, when I graduated high school, I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea. And, everyone says like, I wanted to be a sports agent since I was 3, since I was 5. I didn't even know what it was. Even when I was like those early years of high school, I didn't even know that was a career path. And I think that's one of the biggest things I learned in life too, is that like sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, right? And growing up in the area I grew up in, it was a very sheltered area. So like, whenever you think of making it out, the only real options you really even thought of were I'm either going to make it out as an athlete, or you knew of like the traditional career paths of being a doctor or a lawyer. I didn't really know anything other than that you can really go out and make money doing, right? So I played sports all growing up. I actually went to college to play soccer originally. And I went to Washington and Jefferson College. I played my freshman year. And I always fought growing up too. And what I mean by fighting, like I wasn't fighting in high school and fighting kids on the street. I grew up in martial arts, and I was a black belt in Taekwondo. I actually won the Arnold Schwarzenegger Classic twice, and I won Pennsylvania States 5 times, and either 5 or 7 times, and I won 1 national title. So I actually like fought competitively for years and years and years, and then I transitioned that into boxing. So my freshman year of college, I was fighting Golden Gloves, and I was also playing soccer. And I had to make a decision, so I ended up quitting soccer and I focused on fighting. Um, After that, I ended up majoring in English because I thought I wanted to go to law school. I really wasn't sure. And I think that's a common misconception of like most people in college think that they need to have their career figured out day one.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. So I just kind of picked a major and went with it type of thing. And after I graduated, I still contemplated law school, and I went back and forth, back and forth. And I just started working. And I don't talk about this often, but I actually founded, along with my mother and a couple other people, what's called the Western Pennsylvania Prescription Drug Abuse Summit. And we went around to local high schools and middle schools all across Western Pennsylvania. And we taught about the dangers of prescription drug abuse and how it was leading to the ever-growing heroin pandemic that was just killing people all across the country, but especially in the Northeast. And we teamed up. And I remember at the time, I had met a guy named Robert Hill, who was like second in command of the DEA in Washington, D.C. And him and I just formed a friendship. And next thing you know, I'm calling him, asking him to come speak to some high school in PA. And he's on a flight on his own dime, coming out. And he introduced me to the local DEA. And next thing you know, like our program turned into like, we had recovering addicts speaking. We had the district attorney of whatever county we were in, the coroner, law enforcement, and then also the Pittsburgh DEA would come in addition to it. We really created this whole experience. So I did that for 2 years, and still was contemplating this whole law school thing. And the reason I wanted to do law school, and it was the same reason, I started this program, because I always wanted to help people. Like that was my biggest goal in life, is to help people. So I figured if I can go to law school, I could become a criminal defense attorney, come back home and help my friends who I thought were wrongfully in prison get out of jail. And so I remember one day, it was like actually the first time I ever really prayed. And I sat there and I said, God, give me a sign. And that same day, that next morning, I'm driving home on the same road I always drive. There's this bright red building that says Spina Law Firm on it. And so I went home that day and I applied to law school. And next thing you know, I'm in Miami, Florida.
Wow. So actually, one reason I was interested in having you on the podcast, first off, is one path I've always considered for years and years is going into the agency realm and going into the marketing representation side, because one thing I love about our podcast is we help athletes and give them a platform, and I really have a passion for that. But one thing with law school is like, I'm kind of at that place right now where I'm contemplating, I already decided I definitely want to take a year off of school and that type of stuff and work. But when you went through that experience, have you seen like people who have gone to law school and then get burnt out, or like, have you seen that taking a couple of years off has been helpful? Like kind of where, in terms of the different paths to get there, what have you seen as most beneficial, or what did you gain out of your experience?
Honestly, I believe everyone's different, right? And nobody knows you better than you know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're the type of person that if you take time off, you're not going to be able to start. It's very hard to take that time off and then go get remotivated. But if you also know you're the type of person where, hey, I can take this little bit of time and then I know I'm going to go back, then you may be better off that way, getting that little bit of rest in between. Like for me, I know how I am. So I knew if I took the time off, I knew I can go back and do it, because once I commit to something, I'm going to go full in on it. Right. But everyone's different in that capacity. And when I was in law school, we had, in my class, I had people that were fresh out of college coming straight in. I also had people that were 40, 50 years old also, and had taken a long time off, that now wanted to start a new career.
One question I had right when I kind of did a little background research on you and found out about what you've done is I've watched the TV show Ballers. And are you familiar with it at all? No, but like actually,
yes.
There's a long-winded way of asking this, but like, are there truly, like, a lot of people see that and they think it's this glorious, like there's all this glitz and glamour to it. And being in like the South Florida area, like a lot of people do just think that is what it is. But like, are there any misconceptions, or just people just think it's completely off with how it is, with the way that show portrays it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the show kind of, like, again, that's glorified for TV. It's glorified for that entertainment element, and that's really what catches everyone's attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way the show portrays it is that like 90% of the job is doing that, where you're at these events, you're at these functions, you're at these parties, you're at, X, Y, and Z. The reality is it's really not like that. Like, that is a part of it, of going to these different events, going to these networking opportunities, maybe not to the degree that they show it on the show, but that's definitely a big part of it. But I would say the majority of it is just the stuff that you don't see, right? And that's the stuff that they don't highlight, which is the recruiting element of it. And that's really where you spend a lot of your time, like constantly recruiting and trying to figure out ways to be better. Obviously, you have the contract negotiation part of it, but I know me personally, my biggest element is that relationship building. So I spend most of my time on that aspect of it, knowing the individual, knowing their family, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so you kind of dove into like the three major parts of the relationship, which I think is probably the most important aspect of the business, and then the negotiation and the recruiting. But before we dive into that, I wanted to ask you about how you got your start at Neostar, because I read a little bit about that, and I was wondering if you could dive into how you got your start at an agency.
Yeah, my first semester of law school, I was actually still on the path of wanting to be a criminal defense attorney. And I joined our Sports and Entertainment Law Society. And I remember they asked if anybody could get a speaker for the Miami Dolphins game. And don't laugh at me because at the time I didn't realize how the industry worked. So in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm going to find a Hall of Fame player and I'm going to get them to come speak to us at a Dolphins game, a former player. And I start reaching out to all these different people and X, Y, and Z. And I get connected to Jason. Jason wasn't in the Hall of Fame at this time, but I get connected to Jason Taylor's foundation director. And I'm like, hey, man, we're going to this game, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, Jason was out of town that weekend anyway. But I was trying to get him to come speak to us at the game and just talk about life after football and those sort of things. And I realize now how much harder of an ask that is than in my head it was at the time. But what it did was it allowed me from my constant communication with the guy's named Seth Levitt, right? And my constant communication with Seth was that Seth and I built this relationship, and he would invite me to foundation events and X, Y, and Z. So I really went to everything they had, and that enabled me to build my foundation in South Florida, because when I moved here, I didn't know anyone. And so that gave me the platform to now network. And so I volunteered. I was a first year law student, spending every single day of the week at the foundation volunteering for free. Wow. Just helping out with odd end stuff. I'd bring my homework. I would just do it there. And so they just so happened to share an office space with Neostar and the guy who started our company named Ralph Stringer. And if you know anything about Ralph, I mean, Ralph's a pioneer in the sports entertainment industry. I mean, he's been with Dan Marino for Danny's entire career and has done some of the most memorable things you'll ever see, and still does to this day, right? And I remember I talked to Seth about it, and I was like, man, it sounds really cool. Like, I think this is what I want to do now. Like, this is my path. He's like, dude, ask Ralph. And I remember I asked Ralph for a job, and he told me no. So I was like, okay. I go back a couple weeks later, I ask him again. Tells me no again. He had another individual working at that time that was getting ready to leave. They told me. So I drafted this whole letter. Seth helped me write it about how I was going to work for free and X, Y, and Z and the value I can bring. I asked Ralph a third time. He goes, come talk to me tomorrow. And I go in and he's like, hey, man, I'm not really willing to keep doing that. I'm not really, trying to hire anyone new right now, X, Y, and Z. So the next day I just took all my stuff and I moved it into his office anyway and just started answering the phones before he showed up. And he walks in, he's like, what are you doing? I was like, man, I got ESPN online too. I was like, what? And that's how my relationship with Neostar started. And, slowly that grew into bigger and different responsibilities. And here we are over 7 years later, and I'm a partner in the agency and now running our football division.
So what drove you to becoming a sports agent? Once you kind of got your foot in the door, what drove you to get better, do more, put yourself out there?
Just fell in love with the grind, man, honestly. You fall in love, I think it's very hard to find something in life that you're truly passionate about doing. And like we talked about earlier, right? Even like the little things I did before this, and even the whole reason why I want to go to law school was to be able to give myself an opportunity to help other people in some way, shape, or form. So now I realized I could twist this and also combine it with something that I truly love, which is sports and grew up doing, and now be able to give back in this facet, right, in this avenue. And it's been such a blessing because, I've worked with some of the biggest names that are Hall of Famers and been able to be a part of their ventures and journeys and different things along those lines, but also the guys that, most people would never even heard of that maybe should have, quote unquote, according to like reporters, never gotten a shot. And to be able to see them put that helmet on for the first time and have that experience and take their family down to the field and really be able to live, a dream, and just to have any little part of that has been a blessing.
What makes a great sports agent? Like you talked about the recruiting, the relationships. Can you kind of go into all those skill sets and how you recruit and how you negotiate contracts on behalf of your clients, and what are the best practices that go into it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be general on it and give you like the characteristics.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, it's like anything else. It's a people business, right? And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand is that it's not really about who you know in life, right? It's about who knows you. And I repeat this all the time. I feel like every time I have the chance to say it, I say it again, because that's a big part about putting yourself out there. And you want to be able to have that credibility and that trust. Like I can tell you right now, like, hey man, me and blank or best friends, so you go ahead and call that person, they're going to say, who in the heck is that? But if it's the reverse and they can vouch for you, that's a whole different situation. It's the same thing, even in this industry. If you have a guy that you're looking to get on a team, your word goes a long way. And if you ruin that reputation early on, then it's hard for people to trust you and trust your opinion. So you always got to remember it's about who knows you, but also about that you only get one reputation. So don't ruin that. Second, I honestly believe persistence. You got to be persistent, because you're going to hear a heck of a lot more no's than you ever will yeses, especially in the recruiting game, right? I don't care who you are. I don't care how many clients you have. I don't care what you've done. You've been told no more times than you've been told yes when you're recruiting athletes. And it's just a numbers thing at that point, You have, if you think about it, a lot of agents, their dream is to represent a first-round draft pick. You have 32 guys that get drafted every year. You have 900 and some agents. The numbers just don't add up. Not everyone's going to get a first-round draft pick. Actually, the majority of people will never get a first-round draft pick. But it's just being persistent, staying true to it, right? And finding something that works for you. Not everyone can do everything. So figure out what those things are that you're good at and go ahead and attack those.
Yeah. Can you kind of walk us through with that? Like, what is a day in your life as an agent? Like, can you kind of take us through the weekly schedule or the daily schedule? Like, what does that look like between the travel, the calls, the meeting, all of that? And, free time, like how do you balance all of it and the work-life balance that goes into, having the schedule you have?
The balance is tough, especially early on. The travel is tough to get used to at first, especially with the work-life balance. I know for the first few years of me doing this, I didn't have a balance. It was literally work, and there really wasn't that life, right? There was absolutely no balance. Over time, it's just like anything else that you do. You start to find ways to be able to balance those situations. Like most people, their first year in law school, for example, law school is life. And then second year, third year, they're able to start doing more things. It's the same thing in this industry. Like you start to realize like what you were wasting time doing, what you were wasting resources doing. And then you just adjust accordingly and try to be better all around and evaluate it. The typical schedule is different every single day, right? There is no quote unquote typical schedule. Depending on the time of year, you might be on a plane who knows how many times a week. And I'll give you an example. Just recently, I guess, I was, and Jack, we talked about this off air when I said I was in Chicago, right? I flew out on a Thursday, I think it was, to Indianapolis, Indiana. I met a client there, and then the next day, shot over to Fort Wayne, Indiana. So that was a Friday. We did a youth football camp with one of our clients. Saturday, got on a flight to Chicago in the morning. Landed in Chicago. I was there Saturday night through Sunday. Sunday night, got on a flight to Pittsburgh. Met up with another client in Pittsburgh. Here's where my balance came in. I saw my family for a day and a half. I was there for a couple of days, shot back to Florida. I had a wedding. And the next day after the wedding, I got on a flight to Los Angeles for a commercial shoot with another client. and I was in LA for 3 days and then hopped on a red eye and got back to Miami. So it's like those little things that, you know, they just add up quickly, and time goes by fast. So there's really not that typical quote unquote day.
Yeah. So like one thing I've always wondered, and from following agents on social media or talking to other agents in the past privately, one thing I've always wondered, and something I don't know if I've really ever asked, is how do you balance the communication when you have multiple clients and make them feel like, you know, you're still very involved with their lives on and off the field? And then how do you balance of showing up to games? You know, there's only, you know, now there's 17 games in a season. Right. So you got that extra bonus, but with the guys that are currently active, right, how do you kind of make sure you're there and, you know, in face and showing your support for them on the field?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, honestly. It's something that you really got to master, and you got to be strategic with, and you also got to have a plan, right? And you can't just kind of wing that. Like that's something you do have to figure out and plan out. And sometimes it's looking at those, all right, which of those games are a Thursday night game, a Sunday night game, a Monday night game. Now let me parlay that onto something else. Because remember, you're not just going to those games, you're also going to college games recruiting on Saturdays. So you try to time up those cities strategically, or at least to the degree that you can, to be able to hit a Saturday game, either hop in a car, hop on another flight, be there for Sunday, and then wherever you got to be on Monday or Thursday, et cetera. But also having the team around you, right? And I'm very blessed to work with individuals that I trust and that I've been able to grow with and along the lines, and also learn a lot from. So having them as well, and having them be able to be flexible, and having them to be able to go support, because one person can't do everything, right? At the end of the day. But in terms of keeping those relationships, the beauty of it is that we all have these, right? And even if you can't FaceTime somebody every single day, even if you can't make that phone call every single day, it takes you 2 seconds to send a text message, right? Just to check up, follow up, see how things are going. And also social media, so big nowadays. I can't tell you how many of my guys I talk to on Instagram messaging and just different things just to keep up with. So from that aspect, I think the relationship part sort of becomes natural, just like it does with any of your other friends, right? Because you form that true friendship, that true brotherhood.
How long does it take for athletes to warm up to you? Like, let's just say they agree to be your client and, you know, they trust you and they're in your process, pre-draft workout, whatever. But what is kind of the point you see people start to open up?
It all depends. It depends on the individual. Everyone grows up differently, right? So how we grow up a lot of times shapes how open we are to certain things, how our trust is in those different avenues. So it's really about understanding each other first. And once you create that understanding, then that trust starts to build. So depending on who it is, you may have been recruiting that individual for 4 years, 3 years, whatever, 2 years, whatever it may be. So you may already have that foundation laid. And then once they come on as a client, now it just becomes that much more intimate, quote unquote, because now you're spending that much more time together. So it really, really does just depend on the situation.
For a guy that does so much, spends so much time doing all of these things, checking up on everyone, somehow you still had time to write a book called The Fight.
I did, yeah.
So talk a little about what was your inspiration about writing that, and kind of what you talk about in that, because I feel like a lot of what you've talked about just in this first, 30 minutes, I don't even know if it's been that, sounds like everything you have done in your life, you've just, you poured into this book, and you just wanted to share with others how you could help them.
Right. No, that's exactly it, Jack. I mean, you nailed it right on the head, right? And so it is called The Fight. It's coming out here soon in the next few months. I don't have the exact date yet, but I did get picked up by a publishing company, and we've been working through the different aspects of it just to make it as good as we can. The goal is, again, to help individuals, whatever they're going through. My inspiration, I lost my father back in 2017 to cancer. And, I talked about law school and I talked about working at the agency. The part I left out is, during that whole journey, like while I was going through law school, while I was still working full time, my father was sick, and he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And upon the diagnosis, they told him that he had 5 to 15 days to live. And so, like, for me, this is my best friend. Like, me and my father had one of the closest relationships that, I mean, you can't even make up in a story, right? And we would talk 5, 6 times a day on average, just about every little aspect of my life and what his life and what was going on. And I model so much of what I do after him. And so that was like my quote unquote coping mechanism, because I have a younger sister and then my mother, and I was trying to be strong for them and not show emotion. And I was juggling so many other things. So, I would be at a game Sunday, but, maybe Saturday night or Saturday during the day. And then also Friday after class, I'm on a flight to Pittsburgh, taking my dad to chemo treatments, being with him in that regard, being around my other family, not being able to show that emotion. I needed an outlet to give it to. So I really just started writing as that outlet. And so then I just started tying everything else into it, right? Even like I alluded to earlier, I grew up fighting in martial arts and boxing and everything else. So this was just another element of that battle. And his fight was a heck of a lot different than anything I ever had to fight for in life, because he had to fight for his life, literally. And ultimately, he's now at peace. And I wrote about my perspective in that, and just about how selfish a lot of us can be in those moments, right? Where I'm sure it's happened to you, Jack, and you, Sammy, as well, at certain points where things aren't going our way, and we're sitting there questioning, why me, why me? And I had that for months with this battle, actually for years, because he fought for about 2.5 years, even after that initial diagnosis. And I had to learn how to shift my perspective, and that's really what started my faith journey, and or at least to a degree that I never even imagined, and been able to start that and get closer to Jesus. But just shifting that perspective from why me to why not me, and that's really what led me to say, okay, I need to take this public, because clearly God put me through this for a reason. And to me, like, just speaking with him, that reason is to help other people.
You sound like a very living in the moment, but looking forward, looking to whatever is next. What is next for you? Because I feel like sometimes you don't even know what's in front of you for dinner, like the next day. Like how do you plan like your next week or 2 weeks, or like a long-term goal or plan? Like how do you kind of structure that in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I write a lot of things. Like, I'm still very old school. Actually, 2 days ago, I got a cast off that I had on for 13 weeks, and it was driving me nuts not being able to write normally. So, because I'm so used to that physical, just writing on paper. But I write a lot of those things down just to have some sort of vision at all times. Um, I think it's important to have a vision, whatever that is, whether it's believable, not believable, attainable, not attainable. That's all up to us to decide, right? And I think that attainability also is a reflection on how willing we are to actually go forward with those things, and do the little things that it takes to build that big structure. And social media right nowadays makes it seem like everything happens like this, and the reality is it doesn't. You need to put your ego and pride aside, do those little building blocks all the way up, and that'll enable you to be able to do whatever that goal is long term. And if it doesn't work out, last thing I ever want to do in life is to sit back at the end of the day when I'm old and I have grandkids and tell them, you know what, I probably could have did that, but I didn't try. Or I did try, but I didn't give it my all. So when you say, like, you seem like you're living in the moment, but always looking forward, thank you. That's a compliment to me, because I am always living in the moment. And I do always try to look forward, but I always try to make sure I give it my all in every single situation that I come into.
And something that you've definitely given your all in, and a quote that I read that you've said was, you look at professional athletes and you look at creating them and helping them become professional men. What goes into that for you specifically? Like how do you attack that, taking a fresh out of college athlete or whatever in that situation, and really trying to help mold them into the best them that they could be?
Honestly, it's one of those things that they don't even know is happening. And we talk about it, and it's just those little conversations that they don't realize what's being poured in that moment. So one of the things we like to do is bring our current guys around some of our retired guys and the older guys, and let them hear their stories as well. How it was like whenever they first came into the league. And I mean, clearly the league changes all the time, and it's changed a lot since Dan Marino was a rookie to a rookie today. The whole everything's different in that whole landscape for the most part. But with that being said, like they share a lot of things in common, which most people can never say, which is wearing that crest, that NFL logo, that shield, and just the different pressures that come off of that, right? Not just the pressures on TV, but the pressures internally from friends and family that they put on you. So it's just building that up and saying, hey, look, this is what you have in front of you. This is the opportunity you have in front of you. Um, you have a chance to do something that most of the world will never have the opportunity to do. And just to remember that each and every time that you walk out there and you attack this. So not only are we talking about on the field, but we're talking about the things they do off the field. All right. And my biggest thing is like nowadays, everybody wants to do everything at once. And it's like, hey, sometimes you need to take a step back and remember like those other things will come, but you still need to handle A, B, and C first. Right. So let's dial it down. Let's be mature about it, and let's take those steps each step of the way.
One question I just kind of had, kind of off topic of where we've been at, but you deal with a lot of clients within the sports world, and you're really involved in sports. But do you ever take a step back and really like enjoy and engage in sports, and like, do you have like a memory that really sticks out? You said like, wow, I got to kind of take a step away from what I do and just really immerse myself in what sports really is about.
You know what? It's I'm glad you asked that because I don't often get to do that. I really don't. And you're just running constantly and you're here, you're there. And it happened to me not this past year, the year prior, Super Bowl. It was the game down here in Miami. And I remember that week was crazy. And it's funny because Danny's been retired for a long time, Marino. But anytime anything's in Miami, it's not an event unless Dan Marino shows up. So that whole week, we were literally slammed back to back from 8 in the morning would be our first appearance, and we'd be out till 12:30, 1 o'clock, just doing stuff nonstop. And then you get back, by the time you get back to the hotel and everything else, or if we were driving back home, whatever it was, you're just dead, man. You know, you're just dead. So the Super Bowl Sunday comes, and I remember I woke up and I was like dreading going to the game where everyone else is all fired up to be going to the Super Bowl. I'm like, oh man, here we go. I'm so tired at this point. I just want to like not get through it, but get through it. Right. Like, and I didn't have any clients playing in the game. So I just kind of wanted to get through it. And we were doing stuff at the game and we had different appearances. But they also had, that was the year they did the 100 greatest players of all time. And I remember we showed up to the stadium just in time for that. And it was me, Ralph, that I mentioned earlier, and Dan. And when we got there, we went straight back to that room. And I looked around the room. And that was the first time where I looked around. I'm like, dang, I'm really the only other person in here other than the NFL Films crew and Ralph, other than all these guys who are the greatest to ever play this sport. And it's funny, if you go back and watch the Super Bowl film, they did the announcements by position coming out of the tunnel. And if you look, it was Danny, and then I think it was Peyton right after him, or Brett Favre, one of the two, either Brett or Peyton Manning, and then Tom Brady, and then me and Ralph right behind Tom walking out onto the field. And when I got out there, I just kind of looked around in that moment, and I was like, wow, like this is pretty incredible that here we are, Super Bowl Sunday. We're down on the field. There's all these fans, and everyone's just kind of locked in on this moment. And here we are, down with the greatest players to ever play the sport. And that was one of the most special moments. And that, I remember that's the time that I really sat there and said, "Dang, I wish I can call my dad right now or FaceTime my dad and show him what this is." Right. So that's probably my most fond memory where I really got to soak it in.
So one thing I was wondering is, you being a Pittsburgh guy, which we've kind of discussed quite a bit this pod.
Yeah.
You represent and work with clients like Dan Marino, Jason Taylor, who are Pittsburgh guys. So what is it like for you to work with Pittsburgh natives and beyond, get to have those working and personal relationships with them? Because I'm sure growing up, you saw and heard a lot about them. So what was that like, the evolution from being, just a fellow Pittsburgh native to kind of, having that relationship?
Honestly, it was very natural, right? It was very, very natural. We had a lot of things in common. We knew a lot of the same places, and even though they grew up in a different era, you still know a lot of the same places. And Pittsburgh's a very big, small city, I guess. So a lot of people know each other in that regard. So it was really, really natural with that, and it was cool. And I represent Lamont Wade, who's now with the Pittsburgh Steelers out of Penn State. And Lamont went to Clarendon High School, and I went to Charleroi, which is 20 minutes away. And every few years we'd play Clarendon exhibition games. And I told Lamont, I said, what's crazy, man, is I remember watching you in high school, not just college. I remember you watching you all the way up through high school, and just the type of player you were and the individual you were. And oddly enough, you mentioned Jason. Jason was best friends with Lamont's uncle in college.
Oh, wow.
So it was just like this whole small relationship, this whole small world. And, fast forward, here we are today, and he's a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers where, again, he grew up, which is pretty incredible. So just that Pittsburgh connection. And you'd be surprised how many individuals around the league, whether it's front offices, coaching staffs, et cetera, are from Pittsburgh, because there's a big community of us out there that most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, definitely. Like I told you before the podcast, I have family in Pittsburgh, and my cousin, he's 15 years old, and he's a Pittsburgh through and through, diehard Steelers fan, Pitt fan all the way. Every day in every group chat we have, he sends us something representing the 412, whether it's Mac Miller to Pittsburgh sports. Very proud Pittsburgher. So I'm very well educated on the Pittsburgh sports scene and people in the NFL. But one thing I wanted to ask you, connected to Dan Marino, Jason Taylor, is, you represent the younger athletes as well, like Lamont and, Ian Book now, who just got drafted this year. So what's kind of like, what is it like working with younger players compared to the guys who are retired and, have this Hall of Fame stature? Like when it comes to, the opportunities they get, to how you, work with them, like what are those kind of working relationships and, opportunities like?
It's different, but the same, right? It's different because they're younger, which is just a blessing, because like their whole world is still right in front of them, right? Their whole career is still right in front of them. They're just now like breaking that barrier to now be able to be an NFL athlete and play professional football. Where the flip side of that is they're the complete opposite. They are now done with that professional career. So it's just different in that regard. But it's very much so the same in terms of the relationship, right? Like we talk about similar things. Maybe it's a little different in terms of interest-wise, but in terms of just like being people, it's exactly the same. Like we all have that individual friendship where I know different things about them and they know different things about me, and we connect on those different things. So whether it's me and Danny talking about something over here, or Jason talking about this, or Lamont talking about something that he enjoys, or Ian or anybody else, or, talking about their interest, I think that's one of the cool things, right? Where, Dan and I, maybe we're watching golf together, but, me and Bravion or me and Paul, we're playing Call of Duty together. And that's one of the things I had to learn, was to play video games. And I learned that during quarantine. And so, no, it's just cool in that aspect to be able to connect on those different levels, honestly.
That's really cool. I have a few final questions for you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast. But one thing I want to ask you about is, there's been a surge with NIL stuff in college sports. And I was just kind of curious, as a sports agent, what are your thoughts on NIL? What are your thoughts on the rise of it? All these crazy deals that are kind of coming out, where like today, Alabama reportedly their starting quarterback's going to get $1 million deal. And, there's basketball players who are getting huge deals. So like, and, some of these small athletes getting really small deals as well. But what's kind of your overall thoughts on that, rise of NIL? And I was just kind of curious to pick your brain on that.
I love it, man. I love it. This is something I thought is long overdue. I think it's something that should have happened a long time ago. Actually, when I was in law school, I wrote my final paper on this exact topic, and just athletes being able to profit while they're in college. And it's just something that I've always thought is extremely unfair, honestly. You have other individuals that have scholarships, and they're able to do whatever. If they have a YouTube channel making X amount of money, they can continue to make that money. But all of a sudden you play a sport that drives a ton of money to that university, that institution. And now, you're essentially put in a whole different category where you can't do something off of it. And I've always thought that that was unfair, and I'm glad that it's finally changed. And I think we're just now breaking that barrier for this to where we're going to see so many different things spin off of it. I do think the reality of it is most college athletes won't make a lot of money from this. It's just like anything else, right? Like there's only so much to go around, and marketability is marketability. So if you're somebody that's not getting a lot of time on TV, you're not going to be able to generate those real dollars. But this is also something that I've always preached whenever I'm speaking with college athletes is to utilize the time while you're in school, right? Utilize that uniform that you're wearing just as much as they utilize you on the field to bring those fans in the stadium. Utilize that to create those connections and relationships in the community. And I said this before NIL came into effect. And it's just one of those things that you build those relationships while the community leaders, want to speak with you, because everybody wants a photo. Everybody wants to say, oh, I was with this person. Now they're in the NFL, X, Y, and Z. All right, take the photo, but also collect their business card or collect their contact information, and now build that true personal connection with that individual, because you never know what can happen. And now that takes it to a whole new level with this movement, because now you can actually take that relationship and monetize it legally, right?
Yeah.
And do those things. And I think, and I'm a little biased here, but I think one of the best deals that I've seen to date is the deal that Kenny Pickett did over at Pitt, the quarterback.
Yeah.
And, he did it, his first ever NIL deal for his offensive line, and being able to treat them. And I think that just shows true leadership. And a lot of people talked about, and, I've heard it all along, is how this can separate a locker room. And I think that shows you the exact opposite right there, and how it can bring the locker room together, right? And so I think that was something that you're now going to see a little bit more of here moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you said that, because I've personally actually talked to college athletes who graduated, moved on. And I think we even talked to one on the podcast where they basically regretted one of the big things that they didn't take advantage of was all the resources the university provided them with to set them up after they graduated, or the relationships they could have built with local community leaders and people who now looking back, if they had those relationships, they still would have been able to leverage those for future opportunities. Even after they were done. And so I think that is going to be a huge thing. And we've seen it around Iowa City already. At Iowa this past weekend, our starting running back and a few guys already did an autograph signing where they were to monetize off that and get people.
And one thing just to say on that, there was a lot of people who were backlashing the athletes for getting paid for their signature. And one of the mothers of the running back, Tyler Goodson's mom, literally said, would you accept money if someone was going to pay you for your signature? Like, come on. Are we really going to bag on these college kids who, quite frankly, we just said, the 1% are really going to be the ones that benefit, but the other 99%, are we really going to hate on them for putting in a little effort and giving back to the people that care about these student athletes? I think there's going to be that growing out there, those growing pains, but it was just insane to me to think that there are some people still out there who think it's not the best. I don't know. They got to wake up.
And Jack, honestly, to that point, I'm glad you brought it up. I talked about this actually last week on my podcast with OJ McDuffie, who played at Penn State, and OJ was a former first-round pick, and we're just talking about, these changes, and I asked him what he would think if he was in college right now. And he's like, man, you think about it, everybody comes from a different background. Not everyone can afford to keep the lights on at home. Not everyone's family can afford that, or to be able to give you the extra money to go eat out or to do those things that you want to do and be able to live. So this finally, for the first chance, those that are able to profit off it, they're able to get that little bit of change in their pocket, whether it's to help out back home, whether it's to, feed a younger brother or sister, or whether it's just for them to go buy something for themselves, right? That's not school issue gear. They can go out and get something they really want to get. And it finally gives you a chance to be able to do that and not have to really seek the repercussions. The one thing I really, really urge, I really want to drive home to any college athlete that's watching this, though, is to please make sure you do your due diligence and understand the rules prior to doing anything. Also, prior to signing with anyone, because there are different rules depending on what state you're in, and also different rules depending on different universities. So just make sure that you do your due diligence on that, because the last thing I want to see is somebody lose their eligibility over something like this too. So as long as you're doing your research, your understanding of it, you understand the tax implications, and you're not setting yourself up for failure, but you're actually setting yourself up for life after, and a better life. I absolutely love this 100%.
Before we wrap up, I just have two final questions for you. One of the questions I have is about your sports podcast, Breaking Into Sports. I mean, you kind of give a little bit of advice here with the NIL for the athletes, but I know you kind of focus on something else. Can you kind of dive into how that podcast started, where you're at with the podcast, who some of your guests are, and kind of give our audience, another podcast besides ours to tune into?
Well, first off, I appreciate the plug.
Of course.
So during quarantine, we actually started a course that we were teaching called Breaking Into Sports, oddly enough. And one of the goals of that was to educate students, whether you're in high school, college, or even out of college, right? Everyone always talks about, how do I get into the sports industry? And it seems like that's one of the questions where people really hold close to home and don't share that information. So we just wanted to give our perspectives, right? And there's three of us that taught the course, and now it's myself and my co-host Vinny Scarrato on our podcast. But we all had different backgrounds and how we got in, and also the different ways that you can do it. But in addition to that, we also wanted to showcase and highlight the different careers that people don't typically think of, right? So like everyone, when they think about working in sports, you think about becoming a coach, a player, a general manager, or an agent. You don't really think about the other stuff. So like we have a unique perspective on how you can still be tied to the game without necessarily being involved in that aspect. And whether that's working in marketing, right? So you can work for a company like Pepsi, but still work on the sports side of things. Or you can work as an artist and do live paintings and different events or nowadays the custom cleats, and still be tied to the game. There's so many little avenues that you can now do and still be tied to the game. And that's really one of our goals, to show anyone out there that if you have a passion for something and that passion ties into sports, you can find a way to make that work. As far as guests, our first episode, we had Jordan Rooney, who was actually hired by Duquesne University. He became the NCAA's first ever Division I personal brand coach to help with this whole.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with him. Yeah.
Yep. So that helped. Like he really helped with that movement, NIL space, and so it was just important to us to get that perspective out there, and just to hear from him and in different ways that the athletes nowadays in college can start to look, and even high school, on how to position themselves to build that brand, to be able to capitalize on these opportunities. Last week we had OJ McDuffie, and then this Thursday night at 7:30 on volume.com, we have Joy Taylor.
That's awesome. So with your podcast, what's kind of your vision on how you want to grow it, or with the high school college market, are there specific types of careers that you're trying to focus on next? Are there other sports jobs that you kind of want to educate kids on, that, they could look forward to in upcoming episodes?
Yeah. We're going to have, like I mentioned even before, we'll have an artist on that's really done a lot of work in the sports space. I mean, he was actually at Jason Taylor's Hall of Fame induction ceremony doing live painting at the party, right? Or he does a lot of stuff with the Miami Dolphins now, and different activations and X, Y, and Z. So we'll have him on. We'll have different foundation directors showing how that could be a different avenue, career path. And we'll have individuals that even took the culinary route, right? That are now either a personal chef or started their own meal prep company, different athlete trainers, specific position coaches. There's a million different real estate agents. There's a million different ways to be tied into the sports industry if you truly understand it and actually think about it. And again, it's kind of like we started the show, right, Sammy? Like we talked about, you don't know what you don't know in life. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing here. If you don't know that you can do it, then you're never able to really chase after that and achieve it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Jack and I definitely agree with that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look at you guys. This is how you're tied to sports too. Podcasting. Yeah. It's another great career opportunity.
Definitely. And I mean, for us, like, you know, how we've kind of built up our personal brands around this podcast is, you know, creating our own thing, doing it, getting tied to different athletes and building those, you know, for us, like, you know, you talk about relationship building. That's what the whole podcast space is too. It's just building genuine relationships and building people who want to connect to your brand and want to be a part of what you're building, which makes it really exciting. But before I go into my final question for you that I really want to ask you, you talked about the Hall of Fame stuff. I have to ask you, I've heard a lot about Hall of Fame parties. What was the Jason Taylor Hall of Fame party and the Hall of Fame experience like?
Man, honestly, it was a blast, right? It was incredible, honestly. It was a lot of fun. It was just cool to be a part of, right? Really, that's another one of those really special events that you alluded to earlier, Jack, with your question. It's like another one of those moments where you really soak it in. And it's funny, man, because I remember Jason had finished his speech, and I was sitting next to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Omari Hardwick. If you ever watched the show Power, he played Ghost on Power. And I was sitting next to Omari, and he was like, "Hey, man, I'm going to head out. You want to walk out with me?" And to this point, I had not watched Power. I think it was in like season 4 or something. So he was already like big, and I had no idea. When we stand up, and as soon as we stand up, Drew Brees is sitting next to us. And Drew runs over and he's like, "Hey, man, can I get a picture?" I'm like, "Look, what the heck? Like, what's going on?" So then we leave, and we're walking out of the stadium. And as we're walking out, all these like little kids see him, and they start like screaming, "Ghost, Ghost!" And so I'm like, "What is going on right now? Like, I'm really missing something, right?" And so we ended up actually getting chased out of the stadium by this wave of fans. And I turn around, and at this point, there's 2 cameras with lights following us. And I'm like, "What is going on?" So we left there, and then fast forward, we go to the party. It was just a great time. He had DJ Irie come out. It was a really well-known DJ. Just everybody that was out in Canton, it was pretty much like just came through at some point to hang out, and you just socialize, dance, and have a good time and celebrate. Honestly, he did his to tie it all back in. Like, he played at the University of Akron, right? Played at Akron, and so he did his party at Akron's football stadium. Actually, so it was pretty dope to have, you know, the open stadium and just be out there, and it was a great time. Then after that, that was my cue to go watch Power too, by the way.
Yeah, I just looked it up. I know exactly who you're talking about now.
Yeah.
I know exactly who you're talking about. I couldn't put a name to the face, but I know
Yeah.
that pretty recognizable face and pretty recognizable guy. Yeah.
So my final question, and then if Jack has anything he'd like to add before we wrap this podcast up, is what are your tips? I love asking people this whenever we have people who work in sports on. Do you have any tips for college students who want to build up their personal brand, or, you know, any advice you have for aspiring sports agents or people who want to work in sports? And it ties into your podcast, but if you could kind of give us a snippet of that stuff, 100%. You know, I'm sure people would love to hear it.
Yeah, I would say first things first is don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I mean, you got to get comfortable hearing no at some point. If that discourages you off the bat, then find a way to break out of that shell, right? And let that discouragement kind of shift away, because no matter what you do in life, you're going to hear that a lot. So first things first is to just figure that out and put yourself out there as much as you can. If you really want to work in sports, network your ass off, right? As much as you can, be everywhere, be as many places as possible. I always tell everyone, you know, if you can, make it out to Indianapolis, go to the NFL Combine. That's the who's who of sports. You have every major media outlet. You have every single football staff, every team, every staff, coaches, general managers, scouts, media, communications. Everyone is out there, right? So go agents. So go out there and make yourself known, network, have a drink with individuals. You know, it's funny because I tell college students this all the time, and I know some teachers look at me like I'm crazy, but it's the reality of life, right? You don't always network in those stuffy room situations. Like, a lot of my best networking has come as having a beer with somebody at the bar. And that, I mean, I'm not saying go out and get drunk, but if you're casually having a beer with somebody, you're going to build a much stronger relationship just by having those little intimate conversations, right? So don't fall into the stigma where X, Y, and Z is so bad for you that you shouldn't do that because it's unprofessional. Because in reality, that is how you build a lot of relationships.
Yeah, no, honestly, I don't have any more questions because all I got to say is you've given me and everyone who's listening some phenomenal advice, and definitely something I want to re-listen to and write down some things because you've been an unbelievable episode. I'm not just saying this, Sammy. I'm being for real. Like, this has been absolutely one of my favorites. I really appreciate you coming on.
You don't gotta lie to me.
I'm being for real. Now I got one final question though, because I have a heart for a Pittsburgh-born rapper. Do you have a heart for any Pittsburgh-born rappers or musicians?
Yeah, I mean, I've always just supported Pittsburgh artists in general, right? Because I remember Wiz before Wiz became Wiz. And so I used to love listening to Wiz, even like way before he even blew up and came mainstream and everything. And I still listen to Wiz, right? But I used to love Mac too. I mean, Mac was just different. And, unfortunately, he had some issues that developed over the course of his life, but he was just a phenomenal artist and one of the most talented individuals out there. And if you actually took the time to like listen to his music and actually like be able to see some of the other stuff he was able to do, he was just so musically gifted and inclined that I think Mac was phenomenal, man.
No, I ask that because that is the guy that I hold very close to my heart, man. Mac Miller, hands down, one of the best live performances I've ever seen, and Wiz was as well one of the first I've ever seen. So both those guys have really, put an impression on me, and obviously Mac Miller. If you're a fan of his, and like you said, you listen to his music, it leaves an impact on you, and it kind of like you've been explaining this entire episode, you do have a different point of view on life and how to go about things and how to attack some of your demons and how, everyone's got them. It's just a matter of how you're going to handle them in the end of the day. So
no, 100%.
Really, I can't thank you enough for coming on, man. And I'm sure everybody at home really enjoys listening, man. Seriously, this has been awesome.
Hey, and there is another Pittsburgh artist too. Honestly, Lamont Wade. Lamont makes some really, really good music. So if you get a chance, check out his Instagram. Check him out on YouTube as well.
Damn, I'll have
Lamont is very talented, not just on the field, but off the field.
I'll have to check that out, man.
Yeah, that's something we'll highlight a little bit more during the off season. But honestly, Lamont is extremely talented in that regard.
That's awesome. Well, like I said, can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been absolutely awesome. Like always, not the same time, same place. We will see you guys later.